Welcome to another KE Report webinar produced in conjunction with Focus Communications. I'm your host, Corey Fleck, along with your host over at the KE Report website and podcast. I am joined again by VERS, traded on the NEO exchange under the symbol VERS. And I am joined again by the CEO of VERS, Gabriel René. Now, I had VERS on when the company went public about 6 months ago, at the tail end of June of last year. This is more of an update to bring everybody up to speed on how the company is advancing. VERS is a spatial web company. We talked a lot about the COSM operating system in the last webinar and through some of the last update interviews that I have done with Gabe. Now, if you have any questions for Gabriel, I'm going to save those for the end. I'm going to let him run through this presentation so you all can get up to speed, and then I'll jump back in with some of those questions. Gabriel, first, thank you very much for taking time with us, and please go through this presentation. Walk us all through this story again, please.
Thank you, Corey. It's great to be back. I think one thing just to note right off the bat here is we listed in June on the NEO, and obviously that was one of the worst possible times in history to launch a company in the public markets. However, the positioning as an AI-focused company has been serendipitous, because as we've seen in the last, just a couple of months, that commercial market is exploding. So really excited to walk everyone through the latest presentation here. And thank you for joining. A couple disclaimers, just to give you a second, just noting that there'll be a handful of forward-looking statements here. So VERS is an AI software company we founded in 2018. We've raised about $25 million to date to build the world's first AI operating system, to develop and deploy AI applications, and the world's first AI marketplace and app store to sell those in. We have actually, in our first year of bookings, booked nearly 26.5 million. This is US numbers there. It's about roughly $33 million CAD. Most of the pipeline that we've been talking to over the last couple of years that is really interested in deploying artificial intelligence solutions for optimization or productivity has been in the enterprise and industrial space, where we've got some of our early traction here. And our go-to-market strategy is really through building out these developer networks for your sort of average everyday developer, the ones that have been building the mobile phone apps we all have on our phones today, but also through large channel partners that can resell to the sort of global 1,000 that we've attracted. As Corey mentioned, we listed on the NEO under the ticker VRS, and we're also currently trading in the United States on the OTCQX under VRSSF. So 2023, the AI era is here. And what are we seeing? So in about Thanksgiving, the world looked pretty much the same as it has for the last 10 years. The promise of AI is always right around the corner. By the time we rolled into Christmas, the headlines had shifted. And all of a sudden, we're reading things like 90% of online content could be generated by AI by 2025. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Wired, Forbes, infinite AI interns and assistants for everybody. A new chatbot, ChatGPT, I assume most of you here have heard about this, is a code red for Google search business. Why? Well, essentially, these generative AIs allow you to input something like text and then get either text as an output, which is essentially equivalent to feeling like you're speaking to another person on the other side who might be an expert in any topic, and then be able to generate, say, articles for you, or essays, or blog posts, or customer service responses, or perhaps the beginnings of a treatment for the script for the movie you've always had in your head. And what happened? We saw their valuation essentially shoot to $29 billion within a period of weeks, as Microsoft has invested $10 billion into the company OpenAI that founded that. Now, there's about 4 or 5 of these generative AI models out there, but the theme here is that we're seeing rapid growth and massive valuations. How rapid is the growth? Well, in the case of ChatGPT, we've seen, the number of months that it took Netflix 40 to get 1 million users. Twitter was just about 2 years. Facebook about 10 months. Instagram about 4. ChatGPT 5 days. 5 days. Now it's amazing, and this is the code red for Google thing that popped up here. We have questions, and we go to the web for those questions, and Google's the interface to the web. They've indexed the public web and basically created a handful of algorithms that then help us sort of search for the answers we want. But the truth is they don't serve up answers. They serve up search results. And the alternative now with ChatGPT is you just go to ChatGPT and you get answers. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how truthful those answers are, how accurate they are. But the capability now has shifted. And instead of a handful of links that sort of direct you to perhaps where your answer might be, we have to go surfing and fishing for. Now there are tools with respect to AI that are able to let you generate these sort of text outputs, answers, images, artwork. In fact, more artwork has been generated in the last 2 months than in the entire history of humanity. People without the skill to generate graphic design or photography illustrations say, I'd like to see an astronaut mowing a lawn. Within a matter of seconds can generate this artwork. And so this is a profoundly massive shift, and we are really entering a new era. It makes sense because everyone's been talking about smart things for quite a while. We started with the smartphone, 2007, and now we talk about smart homes and smart cars. This extends into enterprise and industrial environments, the idea of, say, smart farming or smart supply chain, logistics, smart retail environments you can walk in and out of. And what we mean by smart fundamentally is things that are automated, they can be personalized, and ultimately we'd like the ability to have collaboration between these things. Regardless, when we say smart today, we really mean not just connected to the internet, we mean artificial intelligence, some capability for the thing to be able to deliver us something in an automated fashion. Now, if we look at the size of this market, I'd like to point out that I believe this is growing from about 160 billion in 2023 to about 1.6 trillion in 2030. That's the fastest growing software market in history by a factor of about 4 in half the time. So this is the biggest technology wave in the history of technology. And we are uniquely positioned for this market. In fact, this report, Precedence Research, came out about 6 months ago, I think. I'm fairly certain we're going to see an updated version of this where those numbers go even higher. My name is Gabriel René. I'm the CEO and founder of VERS. I'm also an international best-selling author, along with my co-founder, Dan Mapes, on a book called The Spatial Web, which Corey mentioned earlier, is how Web 3.0 will connect humans, machines, and AI to transform the world. The spatial web is this idea that instead of a web of pages, you have a web of intelligent spaces, spaces that robots and sensors and artificial intelligence are essentially in these environments and able to automate and actuate and produce interactions for us in this new web in the world. What we've done is we've assembled a team of deep technology veterans and some of the top scientists from around the world, folks that have been worked in and for some of the largest companies in the world in robotics and enterprise software and artificial intelligence, and an amazing artificial intelligence focused team from the world's leading neuroscientists in a category of neuroscience called computational neuroscience. And this is led by our new chief scientist. We're very privileged to have Professor Carl Friston from University College London, largely considered to be the top neuroscientist in the world, especially in this category. Here's an article from Wired from 2018 describing him as a genius neuroscientist who might hold the key to true AI. And together, we've been building something phenomenal. We've figured out how to develop digital brains. So today's processes around artificial intelligence are essentially machine learning process, right? What we've figured out is the ability to take biological processes that we see in how the brain and intelligent systems in nature actually process information by building a model of the world, planning on that model, making assumptions about what might happen on that model and then testing it in the physical environment or in the real world. Essentially, these digital processors and software, and we call these cosms. These are knowledge-oriented software models. Essentially, they are based on an approach that allows us to embed intelligence in software like we've embedded any other processes into software. And we put these digital brains, these cosms, into the kind of the mind of an intelligent agent. And our agents, because of the way that we've structured the underlying modeling language and mappings between these different data points inside of these cosms, allows them to understand both logic of the human world and the physics of the natural world. They can learn and adapt. This is not a capability that the current state-of-the-art AIs that we're seeing with these multi-billion-dollar approaches are able to do. They basically are trained off historical data and have to try to respond to your questions. If you ask ChatGPT, who the CEO of Twitter is, it might think it's someone from several years ago. Might think it's Jack Dorsey. It's unlikely to give you the Elon Musk answer. And they have to update it. It takes about 2 years and tens of millions of dollars to be able to build these things. Ours are actually quite lightweight, beyond the ability to learn and adapt, which is novel, but obviously something we expect of intelligence. They can analyze and recommend any data set. So enterprise data sets for an entire company, personal data sets, and not just public data, but private data, your data, and allow it to make recommendations for you. They can then automate software processes, and they can automate physical robots. So the benefits of our agents is you get increased efficiency and productivity, automated decision-making, which you can basically allow the system to start to do, much like a personal assistant or an enterprise-based sort of advisor, and a significant reduction in cost and time. The main takeaway here is that we've shifted from the information age to the intelligence age. And it all just happened in the last several weeks, and AIs are now the new apps. So we're building the world's first AI operating system for the development and deployment of AI agents for anything. So the first set of tools here is the COSM Developer Toolkit. It's a workbench for software developers, of which there are now about 10 million software developers, let's say, that have been building out these smartphone apps that are sitting on all of our phones today. Those have emerged over the last 15 years. And in the last month or so, every single one of those people are likely online. We're seeing tons of evidence of this, trying to figure out how can they build artificial intelligence applications, solutions, and agents. And so with our dev toolkit here, developer toolkit, we'll be rolling out over the next couple quarters, we're going to enable that in the same way that Apple did when iOS rolled out. And then this leads to really the world's first AI app store as we roll into next year. Apps for enterprise, apps for industrial, apps for consumer, and this entire range of now 10 million developers who've developed a plethora of applications that we have on our phones, now will become not just apps on smartphones, but smart apps for everything. And so, yes, we've seen this playbook before. What Apple did in 2007 was Steve Jobs rolled out and said, hey, here's a paradigm shift. Now, these paradigm shifts, by the way, they tend to come about every 15 years or so. So you get the late 70s, you really get the personal computing revolution. Those computers come out. 92, about 15 years, the World Wide Web emerges, right? And it's an entirely new stack, a whole new approach to computing now as a network. Fast forward another 15 years, 2007, Steve Jobs walks out and says, hey, here's the iPhone, the very first iPhone. And it had a handful of apps, had about 12 apps on it, maps and calculator and a few things like that. But the next year, they rolled out the App Store, 2008. And that enabled millions of developers to start to build millions of applications, about 5 million apps today across the Android and Apple App Store for billions of users. And this led to trillions of dollars in value, not just for Apple, but for Google as well. And essentially created a whole new era of computing. Well, let's take a look at that. 2007, 2022. There you go, 15 years all over again. AIs are the new apps, right? And so the ecosystem that Apple built that allowed a toolkit for developers to develop these apps, essentially a marketplace for them to sell it in, is exactly what we're doing today, but for this next generation of applications. So the takeaway I'd like you to think about is that what Apple was for the smartphone era versus is for the AI era. There is a difference. The marketplace, the App Store today, right? These apps don't work well together. In fact, they're kind of siloed. If you think about the personal computing revolution, that computer was siloed. You could do things on it, And you could send stuff, maybe over email eventually, but it wasn't really well networked. When the World Wide Web came out, you had an entire network of computers. When we go back to the phone, it kind of consolidates back into a centralized sort of format, and you've just got this two app stores that you get to sort of play on, and the apps that come from them. But we're looking at a distributed approach again. It's almost like the thing sort of compresses and expands. The VERS ecosystem for COSM allows these agents to talk to each other, share information. Our underlying knowledge modeling language, the COSM modeling language, allows them to have a sort of lingua franca for AI that allows them to share knowledge and information across this marketplace. So extending it into an AI network, not just an AI solution. So let's talk about the competition. Today, the state-of-the-art approach is essentially take big data. We've been hearing about big data for over a decade. Big data, well, the biggest companies have big data. And so there's only a handful of companies that can produce AIs today, those that essentially have billions of dollars of backing. And the process is extremely expensive. It's very hard. You have to get hundreds of data scientists in there. Really, you might have heard of this, training these AIs with all of this public information. It ends up being wildly inefficient, very expensive. Unfortunately, the data is biased. And so even though it gets some of the best of us, it also gets the worst of us. The result is a black box. So ChatGPT is a black box. That's a proprietary model. It's owned by OpenAI. Some of these are open source. They're called foundation models, upon which everyone is expecting to build this sort of next generation of tooling and then applications on. One challenge, though, and especially in the enterprise and industrial and government spaces, they're often inaccurate. They lie. They just make stuff up. This has been happening with students turning in essays that will cite an author and then a quotation from a book that doesn't exist. If that's giving you your sales report for the year, you could see how horrible that could go. But this is the state of the art, and it is also pretty amazing. Right now, for media production, if you're trying to create some content, this is not a big concern in terms of a harm, but it is a significant cost. And it does really limit the diversity of the kinds of AI applications that can be made, because frankly, there isn't a platform that allows you to do it, and certainly not effectively or efficiently. What COSM does is, instead of taking big data and trying to structure that into these sort of ambiguous models, which is 100 billion plus parameter, AI models that really no human can understand, we can collect dots from any bit of information, so any bit of data, and we auto-structure that data into a knowledge model. And it's the difference between merely having neurons in these neural nets that pass information, kind of weighting the value of each, say, text, bit of word or pixel, into the connections between bits of data. So what we figured out is, as if we crack the code on the synapses between data. Essentially, the relationships between data are what knowledge is. Understanding that a cat makes a sound, but that sound is referred to as meow, and the cat is a mammal, and then also might be a pet, and it also purrs, and all the various types of attributes of a cat are the links between them. And this is how actual natural intelligence learns. It doesn't require big data. It requires a little data and making that data smart. So our COSM agents are effectively much better than the state of the art. They're able to adapt because you can just include new knowledge and new information. They're hyper efficient. They're explainable, which is the problem we have with the AIs today. They can learn new information, which is a challenge, say, in a Tesla vehicle, which is why we don't have autonomous cars yet. They can't incorporate new data into their model. And so they might be driving down the street. The data says stop signs are on the side of the road, but they're driving on the freeway, and there's a truck moving stop signs from one part of the city to the other, and the car thinks it's supposed to stop. This is not an effective approach to intelligence if it's unable to incorporate new information. Because we have this underlying modeling language, the COSM modeling language, this allows our agents to be also collaborative, and they can perform on the cloud like the ones today, but also for things like vehicles and cars and sensors and activities that need to happen in real time. They can be loaded onto the edge. So they can be inside of a car or a drone or handheld device, perhaps even operating on my smart ring or camera or another one, and have the ability to both incorporate that information and share it across the COSM network, which we call Cosmos. So again, our agents are far more adaptive. They can sense, they can learn They can plan, make predictions, recommendations, and then they can even perform actions. You can enable them to do automated decision making. And you want something intelligent enough to be able to incorporate new information if we're going to start to offload things to be genuinely autonomous. We don't just want things to be autonomous and be able to act on their own. We want them to be able to act on their own intelligently. So the COSM agents continuously transform this data, disparate data, all different types of data: text, audio, video, temperature, motion, pressure, sensor, three-dimensional data sets, etc. Just like we are. Right now, you're sensing the temperature in the room from your skin, and you're getting sound pressure on your ears from my voice, and you're able to see me. Now, this is photons, this is sound pressure, like all of these different diverse inputs are creating a real-time world model that your brain has no problem constructing as a reality. In this case, our agents then can actually output and perform activities across different applications, unlike the apps today, on different devices: robots, drones, vehicles, wearables, cameras, as I mentioned before. And this obviously has huge implications for chaining activities together between you, your car, your GPS, your smart home, your security, right? The temperature, the lighting, and then imagine how that plays out in the industrial environments, in the relay race of supply chains that want to be automated, and start to address the kind of anti-resilient challenges that we face in the COVID era, where we all saw the supply chain completely freeze up. But everyone's been talking about trying to automate this for 15 years. Well, we think we have an approach that is adaptive, efficient, transparent, collaborative, and can perform both the cloud and the edge. Finally, as I mentioned before, our agents, they grow in knowledge, right? And so they can collect and share it across the COSM network, or what we call Cosmos. This now allows for AIs to be part of a network of AIs that are interoperable. You can compose solutions together in different groups and partnerships. Highly scalable, it's a huge problem today. It's efficient, so it's not an energy suck, sort of massive factory of artificial intelligence, GPUs that are being run today. And they can be governed. Their activities can be defined even relative to the laws, because we've been able to translate this from human language, and the laws of a human language is like the laws of a business workflow, or you speaking in natural language to them. And so you can govern what activity and what data can be shared between them, and obviously then enable automated decision making. And so our COSM agents are really the next level. You could argue that instead of them merely being artificial approaches or machine learning approaches that are essentially limited to the data that they received, ours understand the physical world and can basically translate that into the digital world and map the spatial or physical environments to the semantic meaning of objects and words, and even to the social policies and activities and norms that we expect. The result is that COSMs and COSM agents are AIs that understand the world like humans do. And this is important because we need to have AIs that, if we're going to put these things into the world around us, that understand objects, they understand activities, they understand rules. In this case, not just that there's motion in front of it or the shape of a so-called person, but actually maybe perhaps even understanding that it's a family and that there's a baby stroller and things are moving in different speeds and temperatures and heat and all of the sort of factors that help us to intelligently navigate the environment. So we really move from this era of artificial intelligence and AI, which is an artificial approach, to what we consider a natural approach, which happens to be in software, of what we call IA. So COSM produces IAs, intelligent agents, for enterprise, and we're going to make these available for personal use as well. And the impact and range of this is quite significant. This is a report from McKinsey a couple of years ago saying that their $13 trillion contribution to global GDP. You can see here retail, travel, consumer products, automotive, assembly, banking, high-tech, oil and gas, agriculture. Everything is going to be automated using these technologies, the ability for them to operate in devices, in robots, etc. Media and entertainment is obviously being transformed. Telecommunications, pharmaceutical processes, simulation for how certain compounds might affect certain people. This is going to absolutely transform everything. And you can see the aggregate dollar value there in the trillions and the impact as a percentage of the industry. So not only is AI a powerful new tool for transformation, if we do it well, it's a tool for transformation of not just our economy, but of the world itself. And so this isn't just theoretical. And those of you that have been around watching us for the last few years will understand that we started building out COSM just like Apple did with their iOS, we built it out so that we could build our own applications. Now, Apple had to do the same thing. 2007, Steve comes out, hey, here's the iPhone, here's the apps. Now, all of those apps were only built by Apple. The next year, 2008, they rolled out 500 apps, Angry Birds, Chase Bank. Now you get this diversity of developers into the millions of apps we have today. But we started by making one intelligent agent that we call Wayfinder. Wayfinder is a navigation agent that essentially allows for workers inside warehouses to be intelligently navigated through them, right? So it digitizes the environment and understands three-dimensional positions of objects in space and locations. And as you see here on the right, it allows those workers to kind of have a Waze for warehouse that allows them to be quickly routed through the facility. And there is a little animation here, but you can't see it because we've downloaded a hard deck today. But at the bottom, you'll see the total distance, 2,600 feet, essentially being the number of steps that an average warehouse worker would take trying to get 20 items in a row, little blue dots that you might be able to see there. With Wayfinder, that turns into 700. So now in the hundreds of thousands of warehouses around the world and the billions and billions of square feet that are using workers to optimize, your worst worker becomes your best worker. And it's essentially that Google Maps or Waze for warehouse, but with that intelligent agent that for each worker speaks to them in their language and routes them individually and efficiently as a whole. Now, what the result of that was with our customer NRI, 35% productivity gains. We've done this now tens of millions of times. So there's workers working right now. Someone ordered something this morning and they're picking it today and it's going to be delivered tomorrow. And that resulted in that $26.5 million 10-year contract. Now you got to remember, this was just a proof of concept that we wanted to go in to see if we could basically build a solution that was better than the state of the art in an industry we knew nothing about, just to demonstrate the effectiveness of COSM and the types of agents that can be built on it. Then instead of going out and getting 10 more NRIs, we went to the largest warehouse management software provider in the world. They're called Blue Yonder. We announced this just a couple months ago, 3,500 plus customers, 80 countries in the world. Many of the stores at your local mall run their entire distribution center off these guys. They saw what we did with Wayfinder and they have become the first major reseller. Now this is significant because we're expecting that in Q2, we're going to start to roll out with the first customers with them. And then we'd have a soft target somewhere between 10 and 30% of those converted within 3 years. So you can kind of back of the napkin math, think about $1 to $2 million per customer per year on a rolling basis. So 350 customers as a minimum target, which would be roughly 350 million. That's US dollars. And so that's just a baseline. One intelligent agent, one industry, one reseller. And all of a sudden we're starting to see massive scale as we go into this year. We're also doing several other pilots. I'm going to skip through these because we'll have further announcements to come on them, but things in mapping different data sets. The average sort of enterprise company today has between 200 and 800 different systems and data sets across these different systems. And our ability to use a COSM agent to map those together and actually have the agent be the interface for asking questions about the costs of products or where products are sold or any sort of information relative to the enterprise. That's a pilot we're doing. There's the drone stuff we're doing with the European Commission, setting up the flight lanes and sort of the governance and rules, literally translating the laws across 5 countries into something that intelligent agents that are piloting these drones, which are not humans, can understand what the laws of the land are. So this is what I mean about the ability to have enforcement and governance over these sort of cyber physical systems is key. And our modeling language allows for that type of expression and literally the translation from legal text into something AIs can understand and be bound to. Developer pipeline here, you're going to see a bunch of words. These are not logos because I can't share those with you. But active clients here on the left, those are current pilots that we're in the process of developing solutions for, some of which I've hinted at or named in the past. The pipeline in the middle just gives you an indication of the range of enterprise and industrial customers that are teeing up. Large footwear, large apparel, large parcel delivery, global fulfillment, pharmacy, pharmaceutical, and et cetera. And then the goal here is really to work with the channel partners, large system integrators, from robotics to software to enterprise systems, to essentially have them develop applications on COSM for these providers. So we don't end up in a services business, because we don't want to build a sales and operations organization. We're building the next generation technology platform upon which we expect the new generation of AI applications to be built. Quick breakdown on the business model: essentially 70% margin business with the compute fees that you spin up, and then the transaction fees that we have as you call the system each time. That starts at a penny, goes down to a penny. And then when developers sell their AI agents and apps or exchange information in the marketplace, there is a percentage basis. So we've been talking about this new change, this shift, this sort of 15-year wave that tends to come. It's a mythical wave, and then it keeps coming and almost on the dot. And now it is a shift from apps to AI, to agents, right? And so instead of, the current approach where we are seeing smart things being made and the types of valuations and adoption are just going through the roof. The challenge is the current approach to AI does not allow these smart things to work together. They're just siloed AI solutions, which is great. It's kind of like the apps we have today. But the world isn't siloed. The world is interconnected. And it turns out that our approach as COSM is the approach where you start to have networks of intelligent agents operating in spatial locations, able to interact with different sensors and IoT systems and smart home systems and smart industrial systems and robotics and autonomous vehicles and the rest. This does feel like sci-fi, and it's been predicted for many, many years. But I think what we're so excited about is our approach, taking a neuroscience and natural-based approach to this, grounds this in the type of network structures that are required, not to build sort of one big monolithic AI with all of the data in the world constantly crunching, sitting on top of the planet, or this sort of Skynet effect, but something entirely different. Ecosystems of intelligent agents where we are all able to share and exchange information and knowledge together. And hopefully this leads to not just smart things, but a much smarter world. As mentioned before, my partner and I wrote a book called The Spatial Web, How Web 3.0 will transform the world, connect machines, humans, and AI. To do that, it's been in the top 10 on Amazon for almost 3 years straight. Deloitte picked this up in 2020, and they describe what we're doing as the next era of computing. They sent that out to their sort of global 1,000 customers, and those CIOs and CTOs and others in those companies started reaching out to us. That's why our pipeline is so full. We did not build a sales team and go out and start knocking on doors or try to go hunt down whales. The whales just came to our harbor. And this is why we need relationships like Deloitte and others to be able to essentially help us develop solutions for them. That's what their business is. Here's the former vice chair of Deloitte at the time saying the impact of the spatial web will dwarf that of the internet and change how we live, work, and thrive. He's since left Deloitte and he has joined us. We're very happy to have him as the chairman of our board today, as well as myself and my co-founder, Dan Mapes. Scott Patterson, who some of you may know, was head of Yorkton, was also the chair of the Toronto Stock Exchange. John DeVos, who's one of our key Keras Capital London-based partner, ran a $4 billion fund for Invesco. Finally, quick snapshot of the cap table. You can see that the co-founders, the founding team owns a significant portion, so we have a stake in this for quite a while. There's 118 million in the float currently, and we've raised about 25 million US, about 33 million Canadian over the last couple of years. A little snapshot of the warrants, etc. Finally, we listed on the NEO on June 28th. Stock, like everyone else in the tech space, took a bit of a dive, but more or less has come back to the same numbers which we launched at. I think that the recent announcement we've made, several announcements we've made over the last few quarters, have helped us to maintain that. Now, the volume that we see with the sort of the AI wave beginning, I think is super significant. So I want to thank you all for your time. I'm happy to take any of your questions now.
Let's get in here with those questions then, because there were quite a few that came in here, Gabe. So thank you for walking us through that whole presentation. The first question, actually a number of questions that came in, are wondering about commercialization, tying that into revenues. Do you have any updates on the progress of commercialization? Are revenues going to come in on a sequential basis? What else can you tell us about the move into actually bringing in some revenues here?
Thank you, Corey. Well, I think I was just shocked because I think I just gave a breakdown of the future of technology, and we're having a revenue conversation, which I'm happy to address, but I don't want to. is like not the question I was expecting, because the question that I was expecting was something about how much of a shift this is going to have on every industry. So I'm going to answer the revenue question.
Sure. People are just looking at it from the investment angle of more near-term investment, right? People are always looking, when's the money going to come in? When's the stock price going to go up? That for some reason, that question came up a lot. So
well, I'm going to answer the question, but I think I want to provide some more context before that. Largest software wave in history in terms of the value it will produce and the amount of money that it will make. The positioning of all of the competition on the field is essentially siloed systems with historical data, right? The big question is, who's going to profit? Who gets to invest in this technology wave? Well, let's look at the last 4 waves. Venture capital and private equity basically get the first bite at the apple for the first 5 to 10 years. Then the ones that become public companies, then the public gets to, after maybe 1,000x returns have already gained. That's day one that you get to participate. The question I would ask you as an investor is, where are you going to get your exposure to this wave? Like, there are AI solutions, and just like blockchain, you're going to see every company in the world, AI milk, like popping out, especially those that are already public, trying to reposition themselves. We're already positioned this way, and we're probably the only horizontal pure play AI company in the public markets today. So quick turnaround on revenue. Like, I'll give you an example. The public markets might be looking at revenue. We're going to talk about revenue, but I want to contextualize this from a macro perspective first, because the micro portion of it is interesting and fine. We'll address that. What do you think the revenues were for OpenAI last year that resulted in the $29 billion valuation that Microsoft just gave them? $35,000. Mm-hmm. So extrapolating from revenue to value in the public markets, completely understandable. But when you start to look at this from a broader market perspective, that's 1,000x, right? Mm-hmm. Why is it 1,000x? Do you have an idea why Microsoft would pay $10 billion
in terms of the potential of it? I understand there's big potential out there. Somebody's even making a note. You did have a slide showing a $26 million deal. So
that's correct. That was our first pilot resulted in that. Yeah. So our ability to convert into cash is not difficult. Our very first pilot resulted in 8-figure contract. Mm-hmm. The main answer to the question why Microsoft invested $10 billion in a company with $35,000 is that every 15 years, as an investor, you don't tend to notice this because you're looking at much smaller cycles. But in technology, it's really, really obvious to us. As an investor, the main question you have is, okay, you're building a new mousetrap in an industry I have some understanding about, and how are you going to compete with the rest, and what's your revenue going to be, and how good is the team, and all the checklist of questions. Every 15 years or so, there's a whole new game. The game is, who's going to be part of the foundational layer upon which the next million disruptions happen? And that's what we're positioned to do. Better than anybody else in the market, I'd argue. But that's exactly why Microsoft invested, because they know that. So that's the true market value of that company through Microsoft's eyes. Now, that's not the public's eyes. So let me address your question now, but I wanted to contextualize that. Number one, I think I point out that the Blue Yonder deals would start to roll out in Q2. So we have to they're doing an integration with us. And the reason you didn't see significant revenues last year was, instead of us, like I said, onesie, twosie, go getting a whole bunch of other little small warehouse companies, why not just go to the biggest fish in the pond and get them to basically resell for us, where we would see $1 to $2 million per year per customer. Now, with a soft target within 3 years of about 10% of the 3,500 they have, and let's say a high target of about 30%. So somewhere between $350 million and $1 billion in annual revenue 3 years from now is what I would expect to see if we never roll out a single new thing. If this big vision that we just painted and the horizontal catching the big wave thing doesn't happen, that's my expectation, except that we'll roll in other resellers, which we're in conversations about as well, to enable more and more scale and sort of hedge the bet, if you will. So I think that we're going to see near-term revenue start to come in Q2, Q3, And then you're just going to see that start to double, just based on the current sort of resale agreement that we have in place.
Okay. So then it'll just pick up steam then. Should people be looking at you for a big investment from a major tech company? Then you brought up Microsoft and the big investment they made on practically no revenue in another company. Is that also something that's on the table for Verses?
It's a really good question, Corey. So imagine right now, Google has a very similar set of tools that OpenAI has. And Microsoft, by the way, put $1 billion in them a few years ago in anticipation that something like this would happen. And now they're going to roll it into Office and PowerPoint and everything. You know, that's why they've done this deal. And start to use that capability. Well, Google's, Code Red brought Larry and Sergey, the founders, back last week to basically figure out what their AI strategy is. Now they have a bunch of similar tools, so expect Google to surface here. But how much would Google pay if everything I just presented to you, we could demonstrate to them as being correct for us to have the leapfrog opportunity over Microsoft or perhaps Facebook or a handful of others that are taking the current approach of neural nets as opposed to the sort of knowledge-based approach, neuroscience-based approach that we're taking? If we wanted to make a lot of money, that would be the best play for us. But let me just highlight like 3 things of why we're not interested in looking at that kind of a deal. Number one, we developed a set of standards that we gave to the public. That's the underlying modeling language for this. I've mentioned it before, hyperspace modeling language, and we've donated that to the IEEE, who standardized Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Ethernet, and the rest. So we gave our most valuable asset, once we proved out the science, to the public. Then we wrote a book about our entire vision for the next 50 years, the implications of these kinds of technologies, which became an international bestseller. And that we put our entire thoughts out into the public. Then we took our company public. And so we actually want the public to benefit from this process. And we've been basically a public company in our sort of mindset from day one, because everything we've been doing is sort of in service of that. Now, I couldn't tell you that if someone offered the right deal or we felt that that was ultimately the right thing to do at scale for our mission statement, which is to sort of imagine and build a smarter world, that we wouldn't look at that. But that's not our focus at all. It's not something we're entertaining. And we expect to, this to grow to become one of the big companies over the next decade.
Okay, you want to be a leader in the space then. What other competitors do you have then? If you've already shared a lot of this information of what you're trying to do, what you're planning on doing, who else are your competitors?
So if you ask me on Thanksgiving, I would say what I've been saying for the last 3 years, that we don't have any competitors. Mm-hmm. Today, I will tell you that the competitors are the companies that are rolling out these sort of foundation models like OpenAI and the rest. Microsoft will become a competitor. Google will become a competitor. Now the competitors are both the biggest fish and a handful of new startups. Now this is a big moving target, and one of the benefits we have is that they are all building on 10-year-old technology. The breakthroughs that happen in neural nets were like 2010, right? And so our approach it's the difference between an approach to generating energy that is based on nuclear fission, that has the kind of negative outcomes and pollution and effects that has, and risks and threats, and something like nuclear fusion, which we all just heard about, right? Just a huge historical announcement. By the way, OpenAI doesn't know that happened because most of its training data occurred before 2021. So having an AI that understands new information, able to adapt and incorporate that, is an absolute game changer. So do we have competition? Yes. Now I would say everybody is building AI out there as competition. The one note is that no one is building out type of platform-based approach based on standards that allows AIs to work together in a network. And from that perspective, we're the only player in town. And that's where those 10 million developers that have been building smartphone apps are now trying to figure out how to build smart apps. If that platform was up and running today, which we expect to start to roll it out over the next couple of quarters, I would expect to see numbers quite similar to ChatGPT, but of developers building apps that will generate their own hundreds of thousands and millions of users. So we're going for a horizontal foundational play. We've been planning for this moment. We're perfectly positioned for it. And then now we've caught the timing and trend thing that's so hard to do as an innovative startup company. And that 0 to 1 problem of who are you and what are we doing? I don't quite understand. Now you and I are having a conversation about the 1 to 10 opportunity, right? And so I think that this is a huge shift. And I even though now there's competition, now there's market validation. We're looking forward to competing.
That's true. And that is good to have competition. Some people are worried, though, that because you're in the lead now doesn't always mean that you'll maintain in the lead. So there must be a priority of getting the OS out there, getting people active on it so that you do keep that pole position.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that I'm really excited about is that some of the breakthroughs we've had over the last couple months ourselves have accelerated our timeline by at least 18 months in terms of the kinds of capabilities that we think we'll be able. So the scale opportunity, which was largely going to be us enabling it, but it being a manual process, like the manual process for building things on iOS is a manual process that every developer has to go through. Now we've been able to basically set up some of that as an automated process, which also means that the kind of developer that's required to build something now lowers the bar. Our goal would be to have just an average user who can't code anything be able to develop their own personal agent, connect a bunch of information about their calendar, their Gmail, their other apps and services, and have it perform, recommendations and analysis and support for anything. And so I think that we've actually accelerated quite rapidly, and that's actually moving our time to market up to this year as well.
Okay, so that ease of use, is that going to be the growth of COSM in general then? Because COSM initially sounds like it's going to start out, you need these developers to come in and start building on it, making it larger to make it even more user-friendly. Does that come further down the road?
No, sooner.
Okay. No,
yeah.
Okay.
And one thing to highlight here, we're not reliant on your sort of run-of-the-mill, let's say, small developer, because we have a pipeline of 100, global 1,000 or Fortune 500 scale companies that want to develop solutions on this from an enterprise industrial perspective right now, today. So the total scale of revenue that we can see just on the enterprise side, which is why we set up an entire enterprise division with ex-Honeywell, ex-robotics, sort of experts, is already massive. I mean, there's a significant amount. You see what one deal did with one reseller in one industry. I showed you 20 different industries up there with what you might imagine to be some of the top players in the space. So I think that we're well positioned in a way that most of these others just aren't.
Okay. Now, there are a number of questions about just Chatter GPT, the iPhone movement for Verses. How does this all fit in outside of simply just bringing more attention to this space or these ideas? What happens with Chat GPT as well as Verses as you move forward?
Well, these new solutions have significant challenges. I say new because they've just come out, but they're based on old, they're new approaches to old sort of technological breakthroughs. Our approach, as I've indicated, is completely the opposite. We don't use big data. It uses just any bit of data, and you can just add more and more and more. So if you want to bring a bunch of data, you can. If you only have a little bit and you want it to learn something, you can just start with almost nothing. And that's a completely different approach. The other problem you have here is that because these things are largely pulling from public data, that is the limitation of what they can provide you information on. Let me give you some context. The Google crawls what's predicted to be maybe single digits of what the web is. Why? Because let's say 90% of the web is behind a password. Facebook, LinkedIn, your iCloud, every corporation's data. Most of the data in the world and most of the information is not on the public web. So everything these AIs are training on is just what's publicly available. So that barrier to entry is just amount of money you have and X amount of good data scientists and the ability to pay for compute in the cloud to do it. And then if you get a year or two, anyone's going to be able to produce one of these things, right? Because the data is essentially biased, you get these issues where they lie and they invent stuff. So it's not entirely reliable and it's a black box. It's difficult to sort through. In the case of Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and these others, now there's copyright lawsuits because they're generating artwork in the style of known artists that actually have some copyright. So the approach based on big data is going to certainly yielding some amazing results, but it's also coming with a lot of sort of negative baggage and outcomes, and expect Microsoft and Google and the rest of these to be in the crosshairs of not just an sort of a battle over whether these things are good for society, but even economic battles and class action lawsuits because they're crawling and pulling from this public data. Our platform allows you to take your company's data and have an agent that basically can answer questions about your data, your personal data, and basically be able to automate activities for you like a personal assistant, which most people can't afford, or a guide, or an advisor, or a teacher, or an educator, and learn domain-specific information, and then share that domain-specific information across a network. No one has an approach that allows essentially an AI network of knowledge sharing and transformation, not built on big data, but based on a sort of smarter approach to transforming data based on the human mind and essentially how human and biological things process intelligence. It's a complete game changer. And this is why someone like Carl Friston, who's had an illustrious career, is known as one of the top neuroscientists in the world, an academic who many of the top AI PhDs or heads of AIs of the largest companies in the world call for advice, has joined a small company that no one knows about trading on a Canadian exchange. It's because the science is correct. And the fact that we have such an amazing team, we've already been able to execute, gain traction, and have a massive pipeline of Fortune 500s that want to develop on it. I think that there are plenty of other places to go for risk-free capital and risk-free gains. But if you would like to catch the wave, this is the best possible place. And I think we've mitigated most of those risks over the last couple of years by gaining the kind of traction we have. And I think that's being reflected in the stock price today.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, fair enough. You've built a good team. You also sound like you're working with some big companies. How does privacy play a role in all of this too? If there is that much data that's going to be shared over this network, how do you maintain privacy?
Can you tell me more what you mean about privacy?
The question was simply just asking, let me find that again, but the question was simply just asking, to your point, there's a lot of stuff behind passwords. You need passwords to get in.
Yeah.
If you have all this information about a company, about a person, how do you make sure that it's not getting stolen, that it's not getting used in the wrong way?
So I guess there's two parts to that. So number one, our approach to data is very different. Because we're not looking to build a company based on big data, we don't want your data.
Okay.
We're not going to store it. We don't want it. We don't want to own it. It's like anything in there that says, so the data is yours and it's your data. And so the way that we design the protocols themselves, the knowledge modeling language, and why we donated that to the IEEE comes with a bunch of prerequisites around the governance, as I mentioned before, of data. And so you can define in the most granular way what data you want anyone to have access to on your cosm. It's our platform that you run it on, but it's going to be your cosm. You're taking our agent and putting it into your environment. We're going to spin it up for you, but that data, those keys, they're going to be yours. And so then you can choose what you want to share under what conditions and with what other partners and providers. And obviously we're using state-of-the-art encryption and the rest, but our whole approach on the underlying language itself is what's called a zero trust architecture, which is essentially starts with that every request requires a permission. It's the exact opposite of the web today, where everything's open. We have to stick a bunch of passwords and stuff on top of it to try to lock it down. That was a fundamental flaw around security and privacy in the architecture. You can't stop me from sending you an email. You can't stop me from coming to your website. You can't stop me from sending you ETH to your wallet. But our system actually requires a request to allow for any of those actions to happen with any data moving across the network. So I believe we actually have this is going to also become a much smarter approach to cybersecurity and to personal privacy.
That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, that's a big shift from the web that we know it as of now. A lot of people are asking for more details on this 686 deal. What can you share with us?
Well, 686 is a snowboard apparel and product company, and we just announced, I think today, our as a new partner for our Wayfinder solution. So they're a highly reputable brand. They've been around for almost 15, 20 years. And we're just excited to be able to demonstrate more traction in the marketplace. These are just the first few raindrops of the storm that's coming.
Okay. That ties into, I guess, this other question too, that says, aside from warehouse distribution efficiencies, what other areas could KOSM directly impact? What are some of the market applications near term that it could move into?
Well, as I mentioned before in the pilot section, we're doing a handful of pilots today. One of them is, as I mentioned, every enterprise company in the world now today at any scale has hundreds of different systems and data in those systems. So employee data might be over here, product data might be over here, policies are over here, right? And the way that these data systems data is actually structured is often different. And there's no like single pane of glass that you can look across all your data ask questions about or get recommendations even, which would be, like magic. One pilot we're doing right now is actually that capability. So building a enterprise COSM for a customer that needs to look over, hundreds of different systems. We're just doing a handful as a test, but they have a state-of-the-art, data science team today, and they're unable to do this at scale. There's no platform. Every enterprise company collecting their own big data over the last 10 years has been dumping it into companies like Snowflake and Databricks, $40-50 billion companies that are basically just storing all of your structured and unstructured data across all of these different systems in one system you can call. It doesn't structure that data into some sort of knowledge model that then you can actually interact with. They're just hosting it and you can call it really quickly. By having something like COSM able to access information on something like Snowflake or Databricks, every Fortune 500 company in the world is looking for that solution today. Every CIO, every chief information officer that we talk to is looking for that solution today. It doesn't exist. So that's the largest possible one in the enterprise space is not really operational efficiencies. That's awesome. And our agents can do that. Just the ability to have an agent as the main interface and basically pull your data into this sort of knowledge model upon which then you can call and look at the variational relationships between that. In this case, this particular customer doesn't have an efficiency issue with movement. They have an issue with trying to figure out the amount of energy as a cold storage provider goes into each cost of each pallet in one of several hundred locations. So they need spatial and physical information from temperature sensors. They need overtime hours from employees. They need to know building costs and insurance. They want to put like a true cost basis so that they can sell their product on a per pallet basis instead of just say weight and size. And they think they're losing $1 billion a year by not being able to do this. So when you talk about the scalability of something like an enterprise COSM, essentially a knowledge model for your business, that's going to be huge. And that's something that I think applies to literally every major business on the planet today.
So in terms of news flow, how are you able to, how much are you allowed to say when these pilots are ongoing about how they're working, about the potential of, again, getting revenues in, about growing the overall COSM platform here? What news can you share with everybody as this keeps moving forward?
The news that I've shared today is the news I can share.
Okay, but we shouldn't be expecting like weekly updates or monthly updates on some of the pilot projects or anything like that.
I wouldn't look at the progress in a technology company in terms of weekly or monthly anything. Sure. I would look at that in terms of quarterly at best. Okay. What I think you want to what investors should be looking for are signals. What are the signals that the articulations we're making about where we're going show that we're going where we're going, right? And so are those signals, are customers buying? Are resellers trying to extend it? Does the technology deliver on productivity efficiency? Are we able to demonstrate more diversity of those things, right? And as we start to roll out over the next few quarters, you're going to start to see third-party apps rolling up. Apple could not have told you the total number of apps that would exist in 2009 from 2008, but the number was 10x, right? So, and it went from 500 and then it was, 5 million, then it was 50 million, 500 million, and 1 billion, and so on and so forth. So now we're talking about lots and lots of users that grew from that. So I think you're going to continue to see that kind of progress. I would look at this year as a moat building year. Everyone in the AI world is trying to figure out their position. Google, the largest company, arguably in the entire tech space, had to call their co-founders back to figure out what the future is. The future is uncertain, right? But that's where opportunity exists. I think we're best positioned to basically capitalize on those opportunities, and we'll continue to report that to the street.
Okay, thank you. Let's wrap it up. Final question. A couple people are wondering how to join the developer program. How do they get involved?
Yeah, great question. So we're going to be rolling out in the next, by the end of this quarter, the beta welcome list. So you'll basically be able to come and sign up for beta. We're going to start queuing people up. And then starting to roll the beta out, as I said, over the next few quarters, and we're making updates as we go along. We're looking forward. Please come aboard. Come join us. Okay.
Gabe, thanks for taking time with us, man. This is very interesting. Clearly a lot of questions that have come in. We got to as many as we could, but it shows just how engaged a lot of these people are that are listening to this presentation. People are clearly interested and excited about it, and everyone's just wondering how to kind of follow along, it looks like. So let's try to do more of these. Let's get you on the show just to address more questions and keep everybody as up to date as we can, okay? Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate this update. I'm sure we'll be touching base throughout this year, so keep us as up to date as you can. We have a lot of people that are very clearly interested in this.
I'm happy to hear that. This is an exciting time, and it's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Corey.
Thanks.